Hi there and welcome to another episode of Money Moves with Debt Rescue, the channel where we help you move your money in the right financial direction. In this week's episode, we're talking about women and how they deal with their finances. As it's Women's Month, we thought we'd close out the month with just some tips and tricks and a little bit of stats of what it looks like out there for women and their finances. As we all know, there are a lot of myths and stories about how women and men tend to approach finance and debt and the likes differently, and most of it is not true and more myth than anything else. But realistically, there are a couple of more general applications where there are differences in how we approach our finances. Women tend to be the caretakers in the family and would more likely, for example, be buying the groceries or making sure that the household goods are up to date, etc., which means that they might have different spending habits in that way, specifically when it comes to the budget. So because of the different roles that you might see in traditional households, you'll obviously then see a case where women might take on different parts of the household expenditure. They might also, be more responsible for making sure that the budget expenditure when it comes to buying clothes for the kids or maybe the groceries for the household will affect their decision making and obviously the kind of debt that they would generally have. So let's look at some stats and information that pertain specifically to women and debt and finance out there. 42% of South African households are headed by single mothers, and 72% of women also tend to support or are supporting their parents or family members. Women's typical expenses include living costs, as we've mentioned, which includes anything from food and fuel right down to possibly even paying for the kids' education expenses. And the main debt obligations that women tend to have are retail credit, personal, student or consolidation loans, and credit cards or overdrafts. Obviously, this we know could very much be applied to purchasing, as we've mentioned, the household goods, the groceries, and so forth. And then finally, the current financial stress that women face increases or impacts their stress levels by 58%, their sleep patterns by 32%, and their overall health by 26%. So when we look at tips and tricks of how we can deal with money and our finances out there, of course, this is not just applicable to women, but to everybody. But number one, we start with the budget. As we've mentioned previously, your budget is probably the most important financial tool you have in your personal life. This is how you firstly know what is going on in your personal finance and also how you can set your goals. If you have aspirations and goals, for example, of buying a vehicle or maybe buying a house, and you need to plan how you're going to be saving for that deposit, that your budget is going to be the tool that helps you set up. Have a look at some of our other episodes where we've spoken about how the best ways are to do some budgeting. Our next tip is to never let emotions be involved when you're making financial decisions. Obviously, a lot of times emotions could become involved when we are looking at, for example, buying a vehicle, that we get very excited and it could be a driver. But it's very important to sit back and make sure that the emotions are removed so that we do not become very excited and potentially place ourselves in a difficult financial situation. And in line with making big financial decisions, it's always a good idea to sit back and think very carefully. Go through the pros and cons, the advantages, and definitely the impact on your budget before you make any major financial decisions. Once you've done that budget, it's a good time to start looking at investments and savings. Keep an eye out in the upcoming episodes where we'll be talking about the best way of looking at investments out there and how you can start moving your finances in that direction. Again, once you've done that budget, set your financial goals and stick to them. Sometimes small steps lead to big results, but it takes some commitment. So make sure you've got your goals, visualize them as we've mentioned before, put up your board or have it at the front of your mind with all your decisions you make, because when you have that financial goal and you know you're moving towards something, you will reap the rewards in the long term. The next tip is to make sure that you take care of yourself before you take care of everybody else. By setting your own goals and making sure that when you are doing your budget planning that you are taking care of yourself and your immediate family first, that is the best way of making sure that your goals can be achieved in the long term. And then probably the most important one is tackle your debt. the sooner you can get rid of those monthly debt repayments and you clear them out of your budget, and you know that you can start using that money that you're paying towards debt to rather put them in investments and savings, you know that you are so much closer to achieving those financial goals for yourself. So thank you for joining us in this episode about women and finances. As you know, most of them are applicable to everybody, but we do believe that with making small changes to our lifestyles and our budgets, we can definitely achieve those financial goals we set for ourselves. Thank you for joining us this week in our episode. Please remember to like our channel, subscribe, and leave comments on any topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.